a realm that began as a small band of pastoral tribesmen in Anatolia, blossoming into an empire that reigned across three continents for over 600 years. This is the saga of magnificent sultans, brilliant military commanders, the formidable Janissary corps and naval fleets that mastered the seas. It is the narrative of the Ottoman state, the last great Islamic Caliphate in history. Yet our story does not begin in glittering Istanbul, nor in the opulent halls of Topkapi Palace. It commences deep within the heart of Anatolia, on a small patch of ground no larger than a modern medium-sized city, with a man named Osman. In the early years of the 14th century, Anatolia was a mosaic of dozens of minor Turkish principalities, known as beyliks. Each fought against the others, and all warred against the crumbling Byzantine Empire. Among these factions was a very small principality in the northwest, governed by a chieftain named Ertuğrul. Ertuğrul was the leader of a Turkish tribe that had journeyed from Central Asia, fleeing the relentless Mongol invasion. His family were not nobles or princes, they were merely shepherds and warriors. However, Ertuğrul was a shrewd man who understood that surviving and thriving in this new land demanded more than just herding and fighting. It required vision, patience, and political acumen. Upon Ertuğrul's passing, his son, Osman, inherited a territory spanning only a few thousand square kilometers, with an army of no more than 400 warriors. Today, any businessman launching a startup would begin with an enterprise larger than Osman's first domain. But Osman harbored a dream in his heart, a vision infinitely larger than his small principality. Osman's dream came to him one night. He saw himself seated beneath a gigantic tree. This tree grew and its branches spread until they covered the entire world. From its roots sprang rivers, and around its shade flourished magnificent cities. Beneath its leaves, millions of people of all races and colors lived in peace and justice. This single vision would fundamentally alter the course of human history. Osman recognized that this dream was not merely a vision, but a practical blueprint for action. He began to expand his territory gradually, but in a manner fundamentally different from the other Turkish emirs. Instead of relying solely on raw power, he anchored his rule in justice and tolerance. When he conquered a city, he did not loot or destroy it. Instead, he protected and developed it. Christians and Jews under his dominion enjoyed the freedom to worship and trade. This sagacious policy caused people to prefer Ottoman rule over that of the Byzantines or the rival Turkish princes. Entire towns would petition Osman to govern them, rather than force him to fight for conquest. This is what modern economists would call organic growth. Osman built his empire first with a good reputation and trust, and only second with the sword and force. The primary challenge, however, remained the Byzantine Empire. Though a faint echo of its former glory, it still controlled Constantinople, the greatest city in the world, the nexus of trade between Europe and Asia. Osman was astute enough to know he was not yet ready to attempt the conquest of the imperial capital. Instead, he focused on consolidating his rule in Anatolia, building a strong army, and, crucially, raising his sons to be even better leaders than himself. Orhan, Osman's son, inherited the principality as a young man in his early 20s, but he also inherited his father's grand vision and ambition. Orhan was the first to adopt the title of Sultan, and the first to mint coins in the name of the Ottoman state. However, his most significant accomplishment was the establishment of the Janissary Corps. The concept of the Janissaries was revolutionary for its time. Instead of relying on soldiers who fought for money or for their tribes, Orhan founded an army of slaves who fought solely for Islam and the state. These soldiers were selected at a young age, trained for years, and lived like warrior monks. They did not marry, owned no land, and knew nothing but war and holy struggle. The Janissaries would become the most dangerous military force on earth for 3 consecutive centuries. Yet Orhan also realized that military might alone could not sustain a lasting empire. Empires are built on economics, trade, and learning. He encouraged merchants to settle in his lands, built markets and caravanserais, and developed trade routes. Under his reign, Bursa became the most important commercial hub in Anatolia. The most pivotal development during Orhan's time was the crossing into Europe. Around the year 1350, Ottoman armies crossed the Dardanelles Strait for the first time, seizing the fortress of Gallipoli in Europe. This seemingly small move would completely redraw the map of the world. Initially, the Europeans dismissed the Ottoman threat. The Byzantine Empire believed these Turks were merely raiders who would return to Asia after plundering. The other European kingdoms were preoccupied with their own internal wars. Meanwhile, Murad the First, Orhan's son, was laying the foundations of the Ottoman Empire in Europe with patience and strategy. Murad the First was the first Ottoman sultan to focus his expansion on Europe more than Asia. He captured Adrianople, establishing it as his European capital, and then began his methodical expansion into the Balkans. His approach was clever and calculated. He did not destroy the cities he conquered, but transformed them into bases for further advance. He possessed an uncanny ability to win the hearts of the local populace. The Orthodox Christians in the Balkans suffered oppression from the Catholic Church and found greater freedom to practice their faith under Ottoman rule. Peasants found more justice under Ottoman law than under the feudal system. This astute policy made the Ottoman expansion into the Balkans swift and relatively easy. Within 2 decades, the Ottomans controlled most of Bulgaria, southern Serbia, and Macedonia. Europe finally began to realize that this was not a transient invasion, but a new formidable power that had come to stay. In the year 1389, the Battle of Kosovo unfolded, one of the most famous battles in European history. A large Christian alliance led by the Serbian prince Lazar Rebeljanovich confronted the Ottoman army under Murad I. The battle was savage and bloody, concluding with a decisive Ottoman victory. However, the cost was tremendous. In the heat of the battle, a Serbian knight named Miloš Obilić feigned surrender and a wish to convert to Islam. He requested an audience with Sultan Murad, and when he drew near, he pulled out a concealed dagger and stabbed him. The Sultan died instantly, though the Ottoman soldiers immediately killed the assassin. Murad I's death at the very moment of victory was a shock to the Ottoman army. But his son Bayezid, who commanded a wing of the army, proved to be his father's son. His first act was to kill his younger brother Yaqub to prevent any succession conflict. This ruthless decision was highly controversial, but it prevented a civil war that would have shattered the nascent state. Bayezid I earned the epithet Yildirim, or the Thunderbolt, due to the speed of his military campaigns. In just 10 years, he expanded the Ottoman Empire more than any sultan before him. He occupied most of Anatolia, reached the walls of Constantinople, and gained control of most of the Balkans. Europeans called him the terror of the world. But Bayezid was also the first Ottoman sultan to face a challenge on the scale of his own empire. From the east emerged Tamerlane, Timur, the Mongol conqueror who controlled most of Asia, from India to Russia. Tamerlane sent Bayezid a message filled with challenge and provocation, demanding his submission. Bayezid's reply was arrogant and reckless. "I submit to no one but God." This response enraged Tamerlane, who decided to teach the young sultan a lesson he would never forget. In the year 1402, the two armies clashed at the Battle of Ankara, one of the largest battles in Asian history. The Ottoman army was vast, but Tamerlane was smarter and more experienced. He employed cunning psychological tactics, bribed some Turkish commanders, spread rumors within the Ottoman army, and attacked at a moment when the Ottomans were exhausted and thirsty. The result was a catastrophe. The Ottoman army was shattered, and Bayezid was taken captive. Tamerlane treated the captured sultan in a humiliating manner, carrying him in an iron cage like an animal. Bayezid died in captivity a year later, utterly broken in spirit. The collapse of the Ottoman state seemed inevitable. Bayezid's 4 sons plunged the empire into a savage civil war known as the Interregnum, or the Dark Age. For 10 years, brother fought brother, each claiming to be the legitimate sultan. The Ottoman Empire disintegrated, and it seemed the dream of Osman the First had ended forever. But Mehmed the First, the youngest of Bayezid's sons, proved to be the strongest and the most astute. One by one, he defeated and eliminated his brothers, reunifying the empire. When he became the sole sultan in the year 1413, he was only 25 years old, yet he inherited a shattered and devastated empire. Rebuilding the Ottoman Empire required from Mehmed I a rare blend of patience, wisdom, and political intelligence. He did not attempt expansion or conquest, but focused all his efforts on internal reform. He reorganized the army, mended the economy, established justice, and restored the people's trust in the Ottoman system. After 10 years of judicious rule, Mehmed the First left his son, Murad II, a strong and stable empire. Murad II continued his father's work and began expansion anew. He reclaimed most of the territories lost during the Civil War, renewed the siege of Constantinople, and defeated a major European crusade at the Battle of Varna. But Murad II's greatest achievement was in raising his son Mehmed. This young boy would grow to become one of the greatest leaders in human history, the man who would fulfill Osman the First's dream by conquering Constantinople, 150 years after his great-grandfather's passing. Mehmed II became sultan at just 19 years old in the year 1451. Everyone underestimated him due to his youth. The Byzantines, the Europeans, and even some Ottoman ministers believed this young man would be nothing more than a puppet in the hands of the Grand Viziers. They were profoundly mistaken. Mehmed II was a rare military and political genius. He spoke 7 languages, studied history, philosophy, mathematics, and engineering, and read the biographies of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Saladin. Most importantly, he held one burning ambition in his heart: the conquest of Constantinople. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople was a pale shadow of its former glory. The city that once held 1 million inhabitants now contained no more than 50,000. Entire neighborhoods were ruins, and the Byzantine Empire controlled little more than the city and its immediate suburbs. However, Constantinople was still the greatest fortress in the world. It was surrounded by water on 3 sides and protected on the landward side by the colossal Theodosian walls, built 1,000 years earlier. This wall had withstood dozens of sieges throughout history. The Arabs had besieged the city twice and failed to breach it. The Bulgars, Russians, and Seljuk Turks had tried repeatedly and failed. Even the Crusaders, who succeeded in occupying the city in the year 1204, entered through treachery and conspiracy, not by breaking the wall. But Mehmed II possessed a weapon that none of the previous conquerors had: cannons. At the time, cannons were a relatively new invention, and most were small and ineffective. However, Mehmed commissioned a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who had been rejected by the Byzantines because they couldn't afford his salary. Urban constructed a super cannon for Mehmed, weighing 17 tons, requiring 100 oxen to pull it, and firing stone balls weighing over 1,000 pounds each. This colossal cannon, which the Ottomans named the Mehmed, was capable of demolishing any wall in the world. On April 6, 1453, Mehmed II began the final siege of Constantinople. His army was immense, over 100,000 warriors, with a fleet of more than 100 ships and dozens of massive cannons. Against this overwhelming force, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI commanded fewer than 10,000 combatants, most of whom were foreign volunteers. The siege lasted 53 days. Every day, the Ottoman cannons pounded the city walls, and every night the Byzantine defenders repaired them. The morale of the defenders was high initially, buoyed by faith, courage, and patriotism. But as the weeks passed, the situation became hopeless. Constantine XI, the last Byzantine emperor, was a brave and noble man. He refused all of Mehmed II's offers to surrender in exchange for his life and fortune. On the final night before the assault, he delivered a moving speech to his soldiers. "The empire has lost everything. Nothing remains but this city. As for me, I will die with it." In the dawn of May 29th, the final Ottoman assault began. Thousands of soldiers poured through the breaches in the shattered wall, and the fighting raged in the city streets. Constantine XI removed his imperial insignia and fought as a common soldier. His body was found in the evening among the piles of the dead, recognizable only by the purple boots he wore. Mehmed II entered the Hagia Sophia that historic evening. Standing beneath the giant golden dome, he prostrated himself in gratitude to God for the victory, and then ordered the church to be converted into a mosque. Constantinople became Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Empire and the greatest city in the Islamic world. The conquest of Constantinople was not merely a military victory. It was a historical transformation. The Ottoman Empire became the great Islamic power, the legitimate heir to the Islamic Caliphate, Mehmed II, now known as the Conqueror Fatih, became a hero in the eyes of all Muslims worldwide. But the conquest was also the beginning of a new era of challenges. The Ottoman Empire now governed vastly different peoples, sects, and cultures, from Muslim Albanians in the Balkans to Arabs in the Levant and Egypt, to Persians in Iraq, to Berbers in North Africa. Managing this immense diversity required wisdom, tolerance, and flexibility. The Ottomans developed an ingenious administrative framework called the millet system. Each religious or ethnic group governed its internal affairs, while the Ottoman state handled defense, security, taxes, and foreign relations. This system allowed the empire to endure for centuries, while others collapsed under the weight of internal diversity. Mehmed II did not stop with Constantinople but continued his conquest in the Balkans and Anatolia. He conquered Serbia, Bosnia, and Albania, reaching the borders of Hungary and Venice. He also began to expand eastward toward the Safavid Empire in Persia. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire became the supreme power in the eastern Mediterranean. Bayezid II, son of Mehmed the Conqueror, focused on consolidating the conquest rather than expanding further. His reign was a period of relative peace and economic prosperity. However, the real challenge came with his son, Selim I, who would change the face of the Ottoman Empire forever. Selim I, nicknamed Yavuz, the Grim or the Stern, ruled for only 8 years from 1512 to 1520, but they were 8 years that changed Islamic history. Instead of focusing on Europe like his predecessors, Selim turned south and east toward the Islamic world. This decision was not arbitrary but driven by a real threat to the Ottoman Empire from the east. The Safavid Empire in Persia, led by Shah Ismail, was aggressively propagating the Shia doctrine and inciting Shia minorities within Ottoman territories to rebel. This sectarian threat was more dangerous to the Ottoman state than any external enemy. In the year 1514, Selim led a massive army east toward Persia. At the Battle of Chaldiran, he inflicted a crushing defeat on the Safavid army. Shah Ismail barely escaped, but his prestige was shattered, and the Safavid threat was neutralized for decades to come. Selim annexed eastern Anatolia and Armenia to the empire, securing the eastern frontier. But Selim I's greatest accomplishment was in the south. Egypt at the time was ruled by the Mamluks, warrior knights of Turkic and Circassian origin who had governed Egypt and the Levant for over 250 years. The Mamluks were fierce fighters, but their weapons and tactics had not evolved since the Middle Ages. In the year 1516, Selim descended with his army from Anatolia into the Levant. At the Battle of Marj Dabik near Aleppo, the Ottoman army, armed with cannons and muskets, crushed the Mamluk cavalry, who were still fighting with swords and lances. The Mamluk Sultan Kansu al-Ghauri died in the battle, and the entire Levant fell into Ottoman hands within weeks. Selim's true objective, however, was Egypt. It was not just a wealthy province, it was the vibrant heart of the Islamic world. Cairo was the seat of the nominal Abbasid Caliph, and it housed Al-Azhar, the greatest Islamic university in the world. Whoever controlled Egypt controlled the legitimacy of Islamic leadership. Tuman Bey, the last of the Mamluk sultans, valiantly tried to defend Egypt, but at the Battle of Ridaniya near Cairo, the Ottoman army delivered the final defeat to the Mamluks. Tuman Bey was captured and executed, and the Mamluk Empire ended forever. Selim I's entry into Cairo was a historic moment. The Abbasid Caliph, Muhammad al-Mutawakkil, who was a mere symbol without real power under Mamluk rule, received the Ottoman Sultan and handed him the keys to the Islamic Caliphate. Selim became not just the Sultan of the Ottomans, but the Caliph of the Muslims and the custodian of the two holy mosques, Mecca and Medina. This development radically altered the nature of the Ottoman Empire. From a regional Turkish state, it became the leader of the entire Islamic world. The Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina fell under Ottoman protection, and Al-Azhar scholars began to pray for the Ottoman Sultan in Friday sermons across the Islamic world. Süleyman I, son of Selim, inherited an empire larger and more powerful than any Islamic state since the Umayyad Caliphate. Süleyman, who would be known to history as the lawgiver Kanuni in the east and the Magnificent in the west, ruled for 46 years, from 1520 to 1566. His reign was the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. Süleyman was an exceptional figure by all accounts, a brave warrior and a brilliant military leader, but also a wise legislator and a patron of the arts and sciences. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire reached its greatest geographical extent and its most flourishing cultural and civilizational peak. Süleyman's European campaigns were legendary. In 1522, he captured Belgrade, the strategic key to Hungary. Then, in 1526, he besieged Vienna, the capital of the Austrian Empire and the heart of Christian Europe. The siege failed due to the early onset of winter and the fierce resistance of the city's inhabitants, but the terror it inspired in Europe was immense. Vienna became the symbol of the maximum extent of Ottoman expansion in Europe. A European proverb warned, "The enemy is at the gates of Vienna," referring to the Ottomans. Süleyman did not give up and returned to besiege the city a second time, but the outcome was the same. At sea, the Ottoman fleet, led by Hayreddin Barbarossa, commanded the eastern Mediterranean and challenged the European naval powers. Barbarossa, who began his life as a pirate in North Africa, became the Ottoman admiral and terrified European coast for decades. Under his command, the Ottomans controlled Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, and the Mediterranean Sea became an Ottoman lake. But Süleyman's most important achievements were not military but legal and administrative. He completely reorganized Ottoman law, establishing equitable laws for land, taxation, trade, and penalties. These laws, known as the Kanun-Name-i Süleymani, became the foundation of the empire's legal system for centuries and earned him the title of lawgiver. Under Süleyman's rule, Istanbul became the most beautiful city in the world. Mimar Sinan, the greatest architect in Islamic and world history, built hundreds of mosques, bridges, palaces, and public baths. The Süleymaniye Mosque, Sinan's masterpiece, became a symbol of the grandeur of Ottoman civilization. Its massive dome rivals the Hagia Sophia in beauty, and its 4 minarets pierce the sky of Istanbul like golden arrows. But the most compelling story of Süleyman's reign was his love for Hürrem Sultan, a Russian slave girl who became his favorite wife and the most powerful woman in the empire. Hürrem, whom Europeans called Roxolana, was not just a beautiful consort. She was a brilliant political advisor and a patron of charities. Her influence over Süleyman was tremendous, and their love story became a legend in Turkish and European literature. However, this great love also brought great tragedy. In her attempt to ensure her son Selim's ascension to the throne, Hürrem plotted against Mustafa, Süleyman's eldest son from another wife. Mustafa was the natural heir to the throne, beloved by the army and the people and a skilled military commander. But Hürrem convinced Süleyman that Mustafa was planning a rebellion. In 1553, Süleyman summoned his son Mustafa to his tent during a military campaign and ordered him to be strangled before his eyes. This tragic decision, made under the influence of jealousy and blind love, shattered Süleyman's heart and weakened the empire. Mustafa was Süleyman's best and most capable son for rule, and his death left the empire without a strong heir. After Süleyman's death in 1566, his son Selim II inherited the throne. Selim II, nicknamed the Sot due to his alcoholism, was weak and extravagant, the first sign of the Ottoman Empire's decline. Effective rule shifted to the Grand Viziers, while the Sultan indulged in pleasures and luxury. Under Selim II, the Battle of Lepanto occurred in 1571, the first major defeat of the Ottoman fleet by the Christian coalition led by Spain, Venice, and the Pope. This defeat shattered the myth of the invincibility of the Ottoman fleet and paved the way for the rise of European naval powers. Murad III, son of Selim II, continued the tradition of weakness and decay. His reign marked the beginning of what is called the Sultanate of Women, where the mothers, wives, and concubines of the sultans controlled politics from behind the veil. The Ottoman palace became a hotbed of intrigue and female power struggles, while the empire faced serious challenges abroad. Mehmed the First attempted to reform the situation, but his reign saw the first Ottoman peace treaty with Europe on equal terms. The Treaty of Jit-Vaterok with Austria in 1606 recognized the Austrian emperor as the Sultan's equal. not merely a tributary. This symbolized the end of the era where the Ottoman Empire was the sole superpower. The crisis of succession worsened with the implementation of the Kafes cage system. Instead of sending Ottoman princes to govern provinces and gain experience, they were imprisoned in the palace from birth until they ascended to the throne. This system prevented civil wars but produced weak sultans who were ignorant of governance and warfare. Osman II tried to break this pattern. A young, ambitious, and intelligent man, he dreamed of reforming the army and modernizing the empire. But his attempt to abolish the Janissary Corps, which had become a conservative force resisting any change, led to a bloody revolt. The Janissaries murdered the Sultan in 1622, the first killing of an Ottoman sultan by his own soldiers. This tragic event exposed the extent of the decay in the Ottoman system. The army that was once the greatest military force in the world became a burden on the state and a source of instability. The Janissaries had morphed from warrior devotees into an armed gang protecting their own interests at the expense of the empire. Murad IV was the last of the great Ottoman sultans. He ruled with an iron fist from 1623 to 1640 and restored some of the empire's former prestige. He suppressed corruption and revolts and personally led armies in wars against the Persians, reclaiming Baghdad for Ottoman rule. But Murad IV died young without a male heir, and the throne passed to his brother Ibrahim, who had spent his entire life imprisoned in the Golden Cage. Ibrahim, nicknamed the Mad, was psychologically unstable and shifted the empire from enlightened despotism to blind tyranny. His reign saw countless scandals and crises, ending with his dethronement and murder by his own soldiers in 1648. Mehmed IV, Ibrahim's son, inherited the throne at age 6 and ruled for 39 years under the regency of his mother, grandmother, and grand viziers. His reign saw the last major Ottoman expansions, led by the competent Köprülü family of viziers. He captured Crete from Venice after a 24-year war and besieged Vienna for the final time. The Second Siege of Vienna in 1683 was the last Ottoman attempt to expand into Europe. The massive Ottoman army, led by Kara Mustafa Pasha, besieged the city for 2 months, but the arrival of the Polish army, led by King John Sobieski, saved Vienna at the last moment. The Ottoman defeat was crushing and initiated a series of setbacks that would continue for 2 centuries. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 was a turning point in Ottoman history. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire ceded vast territories to its enemies without compensation. Hungary, Transylvania, and most Ottoman possessions north of the Danube passed to Austria, Morea went to Venice, and Azov went to Russia. This treaty ended the era of Ottoman expansion forever and began the age of gradual contraction. The empire that once dictated terms to Europe was now negotiating from a position of weakness. The sick man of Europe, as the Europeans began to call the Ottoman Empire, started to lose its limbs one after the other. Ahmed III attempted to introduce European reforms into the empire in an era known as the Tulip period. Educational missions were sent to Europe, European experts were brought in, and new technologies were introduced. But these reforms met with fierce resistance from conservatives and ended with a popular revolt in 1728 that overthrew the Sultan. Mahmud I and later Osman III continued the reform attempts, but slowly and cautiously. Wars with Russia and Austria persisted, and defeats mounted. The Treaty of Kuchakainarka with Russia in 1774 was another disaster, granting Russia control of the Black Sea and the right to protect Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire. Abdul Hamid I faced greater challenges with the emergence of Russia as a superpower in the East and the rise of nationalist movements in the Balkans. The Greek Revolution that began in 1821 posed an existential threat to the multi-ethnic empire. European support for the Greek rebels demonstrated that the Ottoman Empire no longer commanded international respect. Mahmud II was the last of the sultans who attempted radical reform. In 1826, he abolished the Janissary Corps permanently after a bloody massacre known as the Auspicious Incident. This brave decision paved the way for the modernization of the army, but it came far too late. Egypt, under Muhammad Ali Pasha, became semi-independent. Greece gained its independence, and Algeria fell to France. Abdülmecid I launched the Tanzimat reorganization era, a comprehensive attempt to modernize the empire along European lines. The Hatti-Sharif of Gulhan in 1839 proclaimed equality among all the empire's subjects, regardless of religion or ethnicity. This was a revolutionary change, but it came at a time when nationalist movements had already become deeply rooted. The Crimean War from 1853 to 1856 was the last major Ottoman victory, but it was a victory aided by Britain and France against Russia. The Ottoman Empire could no longer defend itself with its own forces and became dependent on European balances to survive. Abdulaziz tried to continue the modernization, but mounting debt and successive military defeats made the situation hopeless. His deposition in a military coup in 1876 ended the Tanzimat era and brought Abdul Hamid II to the throne, who would rule for 33 years. Abdul Hamid II, the last of the strong sultans, followed a policy of enlightened despotism. He abolished the constitution, dissolved parliament, and ruled with an iron fist. But he also developed education and transportation, building the Hejaz Railway that linked Istanbul to Medina. His motto was Pan-Islamism, an attempt to unite Muslims under the Ottoman Caliphate against the European threat. But Abdul Hamid II faced challenges no sultan before him had. Nationalist movements had spread throughout the empire. Bulgarians, Serbians, Albanians, Arabs, and Armenians all demanded independence or autonomy. European powers exploited these movements to partition the empire and plunder its lands. The Armenian massacres that occurred in the 1890s and early 20th century inflicted enormous damage on the Ottoman Empire's international reputation. These massacres, which the Ottoman government claimed were reactions to Armenian revolts, were viewed by Europeans as evidence of the barbarity of the Ottoman regime and the necessity of its destruction. The Constitutional Revolution of 1908, led by the Committee of Union and Progress, overthrew Abdul Hamid II's absolute rule but could not save the empire. The Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913 led to the loss of most of the remaining European territories. The empire that once threatened Vienna was reduced to Anatolia and a few Arab territories. The Ottoman Empire's entry into World War I alongside Germany was its last attempt to reclaim past glory. Enver Pasha, Talaat Pasha, and Cemal Pasha, who ruled the empire as a dictatorial triumvirate, gambled on a German victory to reclaim lost territories and rebuild Ottoman power. But the war was an utter disaster. The Gallipoli Front, where Mustafa Kemal Pasha fought with legendary heroism, was the only victory. On other fronts, defeats mounted. Enver Pasha's catastrophic campaign against Russia at Sarikamish ended with the deaths of 90,000 Ottoman soldiers from cold and hunger. The Great Arab Revolt, led by Sharif Hussein with British support, ended Ottoman rule in the Hejaz and the Levant. Worst of all were the Armenian massacres of 1915. Under the pretext that Armenians were collaborating with the enemy Russians, the Ottoman government organized mass killings and deportations that claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent Armenians. This crime against humanity inflicted an irreparable moral damage on the Ottoman Empire's reputation. When the war ended with the defeat of the Central Powers, the Ottoman Empire was on the brink of complete collapse. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 partitioned the empire's territories among the victors. Greece gained Izmir and western Anatolia, Italy its south, France its southeast, Armenia its east, and Kurdistan its southeast. All that remained for the Turks was the poor, mountainous heart of Anatolia. But here emerged the man who would change the course of Turkish history, Mustafa Kemal Pasha, the hero of Gallipoli. This young officer, who began as an ordinary military commander, carried in his heart a revolutionary vision for Turkey's future. A vision that did not include restoring the Ottoman Empire, but building a modern, secular Turkish state on its ruins. On May 19, 1919, Mustafa Kemal landed in the city of Samsun on the Black Sea and launched the Turkish War of Independence. He fought on multiple fronts: the Greeks in the west, the Armenians in the east, the French in the south, the British in Istanbul, and the Ottoman Sultan himself, whom he considered a traitor to the homeland. The war lasted 4 years of brutal battles and immense sacrifices. The Battle of Sakarya, which lasted 22 days, was the turning point. Mustafa Kemal, who promoted himself to marshal, personally led the Turkish army and defeated the Greek army, which was on the verge of occupying Ankara. the new capital of the Turkish state. The Battle of Dumlupinar in 1922 was the knockout blow. The Greek army completely collapsed, and tens of thousands of Greek soldiers were taken prisoner. The Greek commander, General Trikoupis, upon his surrender, told Mustafa Kemal, "I hope you are as lucky in peace as you were in war." Mustafa Kemal replied, "Peace is harder than war." The entry of Turkish forces into Izmir on September 9th, 1922, ended the Greek dream in Asia Minor and proved to the world that the Turks would not accept the partitioning of their homeland. The Great Fire that erupted in the city, for which each side blamed the other, symbolized the end of one era and the beginning of another. On November 1st, 1922, Mustafa Kemal formally abolished the Sultanate. Abdülmecid II, the last sultan, became merely a caliph without political authority. On March 3rd, 1924, the Caliphate was also abolished, and the last Ottoman caliph was exiled from Turkey forever. Thus ended the Ottoman Empire, which had endured for more than 600 years. But its end was not merely a collapse, it was a transformation. From the ruins of the old empire, the modern Republic of Turkey was born, led by the man who would later be known as Ataturk, the father of the Turks. Mustafa Kemal did not just drive out the invaders, he began a comprehensive social and cultural revolution. He abolished Islamic Sharia law and introduced the Swiss Civil Code. He banned the veil and the fez and mandated European hats. He changed the alphabet from Arabic to Latin, outlawed polygamy, and granted women the right to vote and run for office. These radical reforms sharply and painfully severed the new Turkey's connection with its Ottoman history. Ataturk wanted the Turks to forget their imperial past and look toward a European future. His motto was peace at home, peace in the world, a complete reversal of the expansionist Ottoman policy. Yet the Ottoman Empire did not completely die in the collective memory of the peoples it ruled. It left a complex legacy of nostalgia and bitterness. Arabs remember it as the last great Islamic state, but also as a colonial power that suppressed Arab identity. The Balkan peoples remember it as a foreign occupier, but also as an era of relative religious and cultural tolerance. In modern Turkey, the relationship with Ottoman history has undergone different phases. Ataturk and his followers rejected the entire Ottoman past, viewing it as an era of darkness and backwardness. But as the decades passed, Turks began to rediscover their imperial history and take pride in the achievements of their Ottoman ancestors. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has led Turkey since the beginning of the 21st century, has revived Ottoman symbols and sought to restore Turkish influence in the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. His ambitious foreign policy, which critics call neo-Ottomanism, reflects a desire to regain the regional standing Turkey lost with the collapse of the empire. But Turkey today is not the Ottoman Empire. It is a modern nation-state, a member of NATO, and a candidate for accession to the European Union, facing the challenges of the 21st century: terrorism, migration, economic crisis, and political polarization. The lessons from Ottoman history are many and varied. The first lesson is that power does not last forever. The empire that threatened the heart of Europe became the sick man in the span of 2 centuries. The reason was not solely the weakness of the armies, but the failure to adapt to technological, social, and economic changes. The second lesson is the importance of tolerance and justice in managing diversity. The Ottoman Empire succeeded for centuries in ruling different peoples and religions because it granted them relative freedom and justice. When it devolved into oppression and discrimination, revolts and secession began. The third lesson is the danger of stagnation and resistance to change. The Ottoman army, the most powerful force in the world in the 16th century, became a burden and an obstacle in the 18th century because it refused to modernize and develop. Institutions that do not evolve die, and nations that do not learn vanish. The fourth lesson is that greatness is not measured only by area and military might, but by civilizational and cultural achievements. The Ottoman Empire is remembered today not just for its conquest, but for Sinan's mosques, Süleyman the lawgiver's codes, its religious tolerance, and its advanced administrative system. The fifth and perhaps most important lesson for young people today is that success begins with a vision and a dream. Osman the First ruled a territory no bigger than a small city, but his dream was the size of the world. Mehmed the Conqueror was only 19, but his belief in his ability to conquer Constantinople made him achieve what his ancestors could not. Vision, persistence, and hard work can transform the smallest beginnings into the greatest endings. In today's world, where changes accelerate and challenges multiply, the story of the Ottoman Empire reminds us that history does not repeat itself, but it does offer lessons. Nations, companies, and individuals who learn from history write the future, and those who ignore it become a part of it. Remember that every great empire began with a dream in the heart of one man? Osman the First saw a giant tree overshadowing the world and turned that vision into a reality that lasted 6 centuries. You too have dreams, you have visions, and you have the power to turn them into reality. Do not underestimate the smallness of the beginning, for the greatest sultans started as dreaming children. Do not despair from the magnitude of the challenge, for Constantinople was conquered after 1100 years of attempts. Do not fear calculated risk, for those who changed the world were willing to venture everything for their dreams. The Ottoman Empire ended, but the lessons learned from it endure. Greatness is not inherited, it is earned. Power is not granted, it is built. Success does not happen by chance. It happens by planning, effort, and persistence. In the heart of each of us is a small Osman dreaming of an empire, a young Süleyman striving to be just and powerful, and a Mehmed the Conqueror seeking to achieve the impossible. The difference between dreamers and achievers is not in the size of the dreams, but in the willingness to work for them. When you wake up tomorrow, remember that history is not written only in palaces and on thrones, but in hearts that hold great dreams, minds that plan to achieve them, and hands that work to build them. Each of us can build their own empire, whether in work, family, community, or even in personal development. The night is quiet around you now, and the stars in the sky remind you that the universe is vast and possibilities are endless. Breathe deeply and let the story of the Ottoman Empire carry you into peaceful dreams, dreams full of hope and ambition, dreams that remind you that tomorrow is a new day full of opportunities to build something great. Good night.